The Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Mr Speaker, Labor will support these bills to Select Committee, where we intend to subject them to significant scrutiny, because although we agree with the principles that lie behind the legislation, the single regulator and the regulation of auditors, we are concerned that the government has managed to get its legislative program out of order, and it actually makes no sense whatsoever. Our committee, the Commerce Committee, will soon be reporting back the Securities Trustees and Statutory Supervisors Bill from the Select Committee, and the Securities Act review has just completed the discussion paper process, and presumably the government will be considering its approach to that discussion soon. However, this piece of legislation and both of those matters are inextricably linked to each other. So why is there a rush to get the FMA into place ahead of the rules that it will operate under? In fact, it makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever that you would put in place the regulatory body without having the regulatory framework it is designed to enforce in place first. And why does it not, this bill, address a fundamental flaw in the design of the present system, which I thought this government would have been keen to address? And that is the handbrake that the Serious Fraud Office essentially applies to the regulators when it is investigating alleged fraud. That is not fixed by this bill, and I certainly want to be looking at that matter very carefully when the bill comes in front of our Select Committee. But to answer the question about why the rush, I think we need to return to the time that Labor took office in 1999, because I want to remind this House that Labor inherited a regulatory wasteland as far as the financial sector was concerned. We had a takeovers panel whose annual report each year was a blank sheet of paper because they didn't have a takeovers code to enforce. Right. How ridiculous is that? Year after year after year, we paid the chairman of the takeovers panel to sign a blank piece of paper every year as his annual report to the House. Mr Speaker, we didn't have a securities markets regulatory framework providing for registered exchanges when we became the government. We didn't have continuous disclosure provisions, and I remember the people in this House who railed against continuous disclosure becoming the law, now a prominent member of the National Party, formerly a member of the ACT Party. I remember we didn't have strong enough rules prohibiting insider trading. Would the Securities Commission have got $20 million for, oh no, it wasn't really insider trading, out of Faye Richwhite, if it hadn't been for the changes that we put in place and the market manipulation provisions that we put in place as well? We didn't have regulation around financial advisors, nor did we, as we learned, have sufficient regulation around the non-bank deposit-taking sector. And I say sufficient regulation because I'm actually sick of people saying that there were no regulators in the space of the non-bank deposit-taking sector. There were. They're called trustee corporations, and gee, what a good job they did, and what a good job the auditors did, which is why we've got the auditors legislation in front of us today as well. Mr Speaker, every year of our 9 years in government, we were regulating different aspects of the financial sector, and the reason that it took so long was because there was so much to be done. We had earned our reputation as a country as the financial sector's Wild West, and year by year our government strengthened existing regimes and put in place new regulation. I don't think anyone should ever forget the fact that what we inherited was this regulatory wasteland, and we inherited it from a national government. And I don't know why I was surprised, therefore, to find this statement in the discussion document on the Securities Act review. Listen to this. While capital markets, like other markets, might be expected to work efficiently without government involvement, all advanced countries have found it beneficial to introduce a regulatory regime to counter market failures that financial products are inherently prone to. How could anyone expect capital markets to work without government involvement post our own financial company sector meltdown, let alone the global financial crisis? Who could write that? Who could think that? And what are these market failures that this wonderful whiz kid has come up with? Well, actually, if you think about what the market failures are in this sector, they're about people getting conned or ripped off. That's what the market failures are. There was insufficient protection offered by those who were in place to protect the interests of those who invested in those finance companies. And that's what makes me nervous about putting a regulator in place and leaving the rules that it will enforce till later, because its strength will come from the rules and the principles that the Securities Act will contain. As Minister of Commerce, I visited the UK's Financial Services Authority on a couple of occasions. The second time was in election year in 2008, and I met with the outgoing chair, Sir Callum McCarthy. We had a discussion about the FSA's oversight of the Northern Rock failure and some of the lessons that they had learned from that. He pulled from his pocket a laminated card with a set of 11 principles the FSA is able to enforce. Prescriptive rules can always be circumvented, he warned, but principles, unlike rules, are not made to be broken. The principles are these: integrity. A firm must conduct its business with integrity. Skill, care and diligence. A firm must conduct its business with due skill, care and diligence. Management and control. A firm must take reasonable care to organise and control its affairs responsibly and effectively with adequate risk management systems. Financial prudence. A firm must maintain adequate financial resources. Market conduct. A firm must observe proper standards of market conduct. Customers' interests. A firm must pay due regard to the interests of its customers and treat them fairly. Communications with customers. A firm must pay due regard to the information needs of its customers and communicate information to them in a way which is clear, fair and not misleading. Conflicts of interest. A firm must manage conflicts of interest fairly, both between itself and its customers and between one customer and another. Customers' relationships of trust. A firm must take reasonable care to ensure the suitability of its advice and discretionary decisions for any customer who is entitled to rely upon its judgment. Customers' assets. A firm must arrange adequate protection for customers' assets when it is responsible for them. Relations with regulators. A firm must deal with its regulators in an open and cooperative way and must tell the FSA promptly anything relating to the firm of which the FSA would reasonably expect prompt notice. I have spoken favourably, Mr Speaker, about the Government's decision to establish a Financial Markets Authority. It was a recommendation that came out of the Capital Markets Development Task Force, which I commissioned to provide a blueprint for the future of our capital markets. I have also welcomed the setting up of the FMA Establishment Board ahead of the legislation and congratulated the Minister on the choices he has made. However, what I have learned since making that statement leaves me with no choice other than to say to the Government that Simon Botherway must step aside from the position of chairing that establishment board. And not simply for the period of the Ombudsman's investigation into the management of potential and actual conflicts of interest, in a case where the public doesn't separate South Canterbury Finance from Alan Hubbard, even though the Securities Commission apparently can, as if that were not bad enough. But Simon Botherway's connections to the vultures that are now encircling the entrails of South Canterbury Finance's assets with taxpayers' cash in hand mean he could find himself conflicted in terms of what will be one of the most significant inquiries this country will ever see into a financial collapse of such a company. Because mark my words, if this government doesn't agree to a commission of inquiry into what's happened with South Canterbury Finance and with Alan and Jean Hubbard, then mark my words, here and now a Labor government will commit to such an inquiry. If National want the Financial Markets Authority to have credibility, and it is tainted already, then they have to think about the primary objective of confidence for investors. Mr Speaker, I wrote to the Minister of Commerce on the 28th of June this year, and I asked him to explain to my constituents about why Alan and Jean Hubbard, who pose no threat to anyone in terms of their ability to leave the country and live a disgracefully ostentatious international lifestyle like others who've taken money off unsuspecting New Zealanders and spent it on themselves. This couple being put into statutory management when we see others living the high life, that is why this process has been tainted and why, if it's to get back on track, the government has to act.
Yeah.